All right, we are back. It is episode 2 of the Ruling on the Field podcast. Like always, I'm with my big brother, Sam. And, week 7, a lot of things went down, a lot of things to talk about. But, what were some of the things that stood out with you, Sam?
Well, first and foremost, it seems like the referees this year has been a bigger issue than it has been years past. We've started talking about it the last couple of years about it being really something that needs to be focused on. I think there was a penalty on a Thursday nighter between the Browns and the Steelers where there was a sack that was made and like the Browns defender did like a kick or he stared to the other sideline. It was a 15-yard penalty. Like these are big calls in the game that matter. And there were so many moments throughout this year, but it seemed like in week 7, Seth, there were so many glaring, terrible calls by the referees. And I know it's not an easy job, but with all the technology we have, there should be someone buzzing the head ref saying, you can't do this call. There was a unnecessary roughness call in the Eagles-Dolphins game that Jalen Carter said afterwards. He goes, I just thought, what would LeBron James do? And you saw the flop. You saw a play on Jalen Hurts in that game as well. That was called unnecessary roughness that shouldn't have been called. We saw a couple games in the Colts-Browns where right at the end, the game's on the line. And I don't want to say one play should dictate a game, but there were a couple plays on that final drive that really were so glaring to everyone watching about an uncatchable ball, questionable holding. And then you had the Steelers-Rams game where there was a ball that was past the first down, but the ball was clearly not a first down on fourth down and stopped by the Rams defense when Kenny Pickett was trying to get that first down. They had no challenges, so you can make the argument that the Rams should have had one in their back pocket just because you never know, but that's something that needs to be reviewed, and that to me was one of the biggest storylines to come out of week 7.
Yeah, I think there has to be something, I think the human element that referees bring is crucial to the game. I do think if you take that away, yes, you might get more of a clear, or I should say a clean and concise ruling, but there has to be some human element. Obviously these plays are happening so fast. These are 7-second plays. There's so much going on. And it's a game of inches. And when you're officiating that, those inches are very hard to make the call. But sometimes we see refs that are dead on, where it's I thought that was a clear touchdown, but his knee was actually down. So, at the end of the day, I do think that human element is important to the game. But you're right. These decisions that they make are costly. It would be nice for them to implement some type of rule where they can have a bit more, maybe it's an official timeout that they can call and try and deliberate more and discuss if in fact that was the right call to make. Because you brought it up, and this is definitely one of the games I wanted to talk about. Arguably, the game definitely was the game of the week, in my opinion, the Browns-Colts. But a pretty lackluster finish in what was this epic game with some massive touchdowns going on both sides, where, that call, you can make the argument that the first penalty that they called was definitely a defensive holding. But the second one that was in the end zone, where it was an uncatchable ball, that ball was thrown deep it didn't make it to the crowd, but it was where the press was. It was where the press was. No one was catching that. I don't even think Calvin Johnson, if he was playing, would have caught that ball. That was just
said. Yeah, that's what the announcer said in the game.
So, it's those types of decisions, especially as a Colts fan, it's very hard to swallow because you see your team put in this incredible game. They're trying to make this, immaculate 4th and goal stop. And then a play like that happens, and it's just it's deflating to end a game on an official calling like that.
Well, and again, not a penalty that was so costly for the Colts, but I just hate it. Don't want to say the NFL stands for the no fun league, but Michael Pittman breaks off a huge touchdown at a big moment in the game, and he gives the deuces flag. And we always see Tyreek do it. I think the difference between what Pittman did and what Tyreek does is Tyreek will just deuce up to the crowd, whereas Pittman looked back towards the defenders and deuced them. I guess that's the word, deuce them. It sounds weird saying it, but he said peace, goodbye.
Yeah,
right.
He was gone.
And the thing that just is frustrating is because so many people have money on this line, money on the line for these games, and so many jobs are at stake. If they lose a game, if they win a game, like who's on the hot seat, all of a sudden you look, it doesn't matter what the record is or how they lost it. They just know that the Colts are this record and this person gets let go or someone loses their job. And the refs just go by and there's usually a report after the game of some of the mistakes that they've made. I just found that this week was so glaring in terms of everything that was happening from the officiating standpoint. But besides that, there were so many great moments. I mean, Jake Bobo, rookie, made an unbelievable catch, huge, crazy touchdown. Puka Nacua continues to do what he did. He made an unbelievable catch. Also, Jordan Addison rips an interception away and goes for a touchdown right before halftime. Probably the most pivotal point in that game. It could have been a huge defining factor in that game. Other than all those things, there's so many things that have stuck out. But Christian McCaffrey, he's been on this run, Seth, where if you put a $100 bet for the last 16 games and you rolled over your winnings on him to score a touchdown, you would be at $440,000. So my question to you is,
a lot of money.
Why didn't we do this? Why aren't we on the
CMC train?
Now it's too late. He's always like minus 200 to score an anytime touchdown. But at one point when he joined the Niners, we could have been rich, filthy rich.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure at this point he has real estate in the end zone because he is just always he's always going in there. Like he always has access to it. He is always like honestly, like it would be. I think going into this week, he's probably going to be like a minus 300 for an anytime touchdown, which is just absurd. And we're talking about.
I don't know about that.
I think it's just you just expect him to go in. I mean, I obviously didn't look at the prop bets going into this week, and I'm sure it will change by Sunday. But the point that I was trying to make is like you almost expect it to happen. Like this is a guy who, he does it on the ground, he does it in the air. He is an absolute game breaker. And what San Francisco has become since trading for McCaffrey, it is nothing short of just like an elite offense. And, it was fun. I was watching this clip of it was Peyton Manning dissecting one of the plays for the 49ers and all the motions they have all pre-snap.
With the kids, by the way. He had the kids.
Yeah, he had the kids.
Saturday Night Live, right?
Yeah. And he was doing all of these different things and just showing just how much thought process goes into Kyle Shanahan's offense. But yeah, it's one thing to try and mentally prepare for all of those motions, but then you have to try and stop CMC. And time and time again, like you said, 16 consecutive games where he has absolutely been dominant, and it's really impressive. But you mentioned someone else because we saw some incredible plays this week. You mentioned Jake Bobo, but Puka Nacua. I mean, we are talking about the early favorite for Offensive Rookie of the Year, someone that no one saw coming. Obviously, the expectation were Bijan Robinson, and he didn't even play this past week. And we'll get into that a bit later because that was a bit of a uncertain cause, or we're still not sure entirely why he didn't play. But Puka Nacua came in, and man, he looked good. Matthew Stafford and him have clearly developed this incredible chemistry. He looks like an amazing 1-2 punch with Cooper Kupp. He kind of looks like a Cooper Kupp-esque type of player, the way that he runs his routes, finds openings, and makes tough catches. And it looks like the Rams got an absolute steal this draft in getting him.
5th round pick, 177th overall out of BYU. Definitely would have loved to seen his preseason odds to an Offensive Rookie of the Year with everyone talking about Stroud and Richardson. You look at the receiving yards. You got Tyreek Hill, AJ Brown, Puka Nacua, number 3. And Puka Nacua is on 752 receiving yards. I think he only has 2 touchdowns. I'm looking at his stats right now. Yeah, he's got 2 touchdowns, but he's got 58 receptions. And a large part of that came in that early stretch with Cooper Kupp out. And me, probably in the majority of a lot of people said, oh, well, as soon as Cooper Kupp comes back, Nakua's going to take a lesser role. But the thing with Sean McVay's offense is he put players in positions to succeed. He knows what his players are capable of. No one knew who Cooper Kupp was. There was a video that just surfaced when he had that big breakout year where Steve Smith was talking about at training camp and at the combine, saying that Cooper Kupp is the most full dynamic receiver in the draft. And there's guys like Juju Smith-Schuster and a couple other guys that I think Elijah Moore was in that draft as well. And Cooper Kupp has just been one of the best, if not the most elite receivers in the game over the last handful of years. Puka Nacua with Matthew Stafford throwing him the ball. I mean, I saw this catch he made against Pittsburgh. It was a 32-yard catch.
It was insane.
Yeah, he got 1 foot and he got the 1 foot down. You're like, there's no way he stayed in bounds. And then you see the replay and you see his foot toe tap in bounds. It wasn't a touchdown like the
Yeah.
Falling backwards with like 2 receivers and 2 defenders. And honestly, yeah, I definitely would give him my vote if I had a vote for Offensive Rookie of the Year. I just think what he's done in the position he's been able to be put in, and just to be successful. I mean, the more you learn about this guy, his story, he gets very emotional before games because his late father's not around to see him play in the NFL. Probably been overlooked many times. Was at Washington. Didn't work out there, transferred over to BYU, had some great numbers there. And of course, Sean McVay has a great eye for talent. He says, we can use him. And then he's just been great. They trade Van Jefferson. A lot of people had Van Jefferson as the number 2 guy there or the number 1 in the first 4 weeks when Cooper Kupp was designated for injured reserve. Puka Nacua has not only won the job, but he's running through it. So yeah, I'm very impressed with him. And it seems to be like, if you have him in fantasy, which I know you do, Seth, that it's always just a good guy to have because he's catching balls. They're putting him in positions to catch enough balls that he's becoming a very reliable target for Sean McVay and Matt Stafford, and has worked very well in that offense.
Yeah, he was well worth the waiver claim. And I honestly think that Cooper Kupp being hurt and being put on the IR to start the season was the best thing that could have happened for Puka Nacua and Matthew Stafford, because it built this trust. And he was able to prove himself and really earn that trust by Matthew Stafford. And, especially when Cooper Kupp came back, people expected, Puka Nacua to maybe show a bit more of a human element and not get these crazy numbers. But in a game against Pittsburgh where Matthew Stafford threw the ball a lot because Kyren Williams was hurt,
right,
he kept featuring Puka Nacua, and Puka Nacua kept getting open, man. And it was, you mentioned that catch. I remember I was like stunned. I was like, did he actually just do that? Backwards, getting that foot in, not having his heel touch out of bounds first. Was incredibly impressive, and I think the sky's the limit.
That was one way to an 8 reception, 154-yard day too. So that was just one microscopic play. That was a huge play in the game, but he was great the whole day, and he was just so good. Someone who was not as good, and maybe people expected to, was the Detroit Lions. I mean, I had that as one of my games of the week. We had talked about it last week as something that's going to be a really low-scoring game, potentially, about a defensive struggle between 2 teams. Lamar Jackson said pretty much F off, because he just went off, had the game of his year, I think, the best quarterback game I've seen of any quarterback this year, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
Was a stat about having the most completion percentage on pressures or on attempted pressures, I should say, by the Lions. He was just able to manipulate, and it seemed like before the Lions even could really move the ball, it was 35-0 for Baltimore. What were your thoughts on that game, and did you really expect Detroit to fall out? And is this an indication of what Detroit is or is it just one of those games that you can kind of throw to the garbage and then move forward?
I don't necessarily think this is indicative on the Detroit Lions being a bad team. I think it's more indicative on the Baltimore Ravens being a legitimate contender in the NFL. I think not only did they dominate in this game, and it was from the get that they dominated, but you also have to factor in, and we talked about it last week, they came off of an international game as well, which typically in the past has, been a hindrance to teams, but not for John Harbaugh and the Ravens. And, you mentioned how Lamar Jackson looked, how that offense clicked. We're talking about a first year, a new OC and a new revamped Baltimore offense. Obviously, there was a lot of slack given to the receiving core against the Steelers when, Lamar was throwing dimes and no one was catching it. But I think that dressing room really heard that noise. Heard it loud and clear and definitely rose to the occasion. And just, when I was watching that game, one of the things that really impressed me the most, and shout out to the Baltimore Ravens offensive line, because they definitely did their job in handling a very feisty Detroit defensive line. But Lamar Jackson just, expanded the plays for what seemed like an eternity. Like he was just moving around in the pocket, taking his time, waiting for people to get open, what seemed like at least 20 seconds at times. And he had so much poise, so much control. And you know what? He ran it in. He looked good on his feet. He looked good in the air, and he looked like the MVP form of Lamar that we saw a few years ago.
I agree. I mean, you're talking about him being mobile on his feet, which we always know Lamar is to do. But this year, there's been more of an emphasis on him playing in the pocket, because if he starts running out and making these plays, that's what's hurt him in the last couple of years. They played a playoff game with Tyler Huntley. Like, there's been some injury problems, and there's been more of a concerted effort on him throwing the ball. But then on 4th and 1, with the first drive of the game, they're marching down. They're at the 7 or 8 yard line. They bring the fullback in there again. Dallas Cowboys one team, but there's very few teams in the league that have a fullback. They bring in their big fullback, and you think they're going jumbo set, and Lamar comes out the other way and runs it in for an easy touchdown. And obviously, we've seen Jim Harbaugh in the past. I remember that Chiefs-Ravens game Sunday nighter a couple years ago where he's like, Lamar, you want to go for it? You want to go for it? I mean, they're going to go for it on 4th and 1, 4th and 2. They believe they have the personnel to do it, but they've shown in this week the personnel that they can really be a more explosive offense. Now, we ended the podcast last week talking about, and I asked that one last question, do you think a team from international should come back? The Ravens didn't figure it out in their international game against Tennessee. If you look at the stats, they were very average. They settled for a lot of really short Justin Tucker field goals, 23, 28, a couple of those. So I didn't expect that to be the case. I always believed Baltimore is one of those really tough places to play in, especially over the last 25 years or so with Ray Lewis and that defense. But there were plays Jared Goff was throwing. I'm like, why are you throwing it to Roquan Smith? Just throw it to someone else. I'd like anyone that's not Roquan Smith. Patrick Queen was there. He got a little banged up. I think he came back into the game. But the Ravens showed me their ability to really move the ball downfield. I think we've been waiting for Lamar. He had Zay Flowers. We've got Bateman. They added OBJ. OBJ looked like his most productive version of himself. I know he's a little banged up earlier in the year, but he looked pretty good. I don't think I've ever seen Gus Edwards catch a ball and run 80 yards. Usually they throw it to him, it's like a check down for like 5 or 10 yards. He had an 80-yard run that he was just going down the sidelines, breaking tackles. They threw in Justice Hill a little bit. There's a lot of different weapons to build with that offense. It was just, can they put it together? It is one game. Can this continue? But it was definitely, if you're a Ravens fan, a very encouraging sign seeing everyone get involved. Zay Flowers was heavily involved. I was very high on him before the season about being one of those offensive rookie of the years. He's definitely not where Puka is in terms of like where I would rank him, but he's not that far off in terms of what he's been able to do for the Ravens and really opening that offense. He's also a good gadget player that they'll run in motion a few times. So I definitely was really impressed with Baltimore. One team that I know we weren't that impressed with, though, Seth, the Buffalo Bills. Seems like they're playing down to their opponents. Last week against the Patriots, they lose. The week before that, they probably should have lost to the Giants. What is going on with Buffalo?
You know what? I don't think there's a clear answer for that question, but isn't it fitting that Bill Belichick gets his 300th win as a head coach against the team that he has just been dominating for what's been a better part of 2 decades. Obviously, a lot of that has been with Tom Brady as, at the helm of his offense. But there's something to be said about the way that Bill Belichick understands his division each year. He makes it a very much a focal point to win those division games. And the team tends to look significantly better when they're playing their division as well, compared to when they're playing other teams like the Saints or the Cowboys in the NFC, where they got blown out. But, I heard a lot of chatter saying...
Are you saying the Bills are better than the Saints?
No, I'm saying that the way that the Patriots play against their division compared to where do they play, the level they play against the NFC.
Clarify for people watching at home that you're not saying that the Cowboys and the Saints are better than the Bills. You're just saying that there's more of an understanding because they've been playing them for the last, 30 years, twice a year.
Well, yeah, I guess to build on that and to elaborate it more, it's like when you play a team every year, twice a year, you build familiarity, you build these rivalries. There's a lot of pride that goes into those games and to winning your division. So I think Bill Belichick is able to get the most out of his team in those games and is the most prepared out of any coach going up against division rivals. I really think Bill Belichick just has some magic behind it, and you got to give him credit. 300 wins as a head coach is incredible, but circling it back to the Buffalo Bills, I mean, it was interesting because you saw James Cook starting to like get things working, but it never felt like they really were like gonna win this game. I know they were up at 25-22 but within the final 2 minutes, but like it took them so long to get things figured out. And you know what? Give credit to Mac Jones for getting a game-winning drive, against the division at home. Like, say what you want. I know we gave him a lot of slack, but you know what? When the time came up and he had to get that winning drive, he took his team down and he scored a touchdown.
Yeah, I agree. I think, games are won obviously in those final 2 minutes, but I don't think they're necessarily lost. And I know that's a weird statement to have, but there's moments in the game where they're 13-3 going into the second half. And you're just like, where is this Buffalo offense? Like, New England's got its own slew of injuries with Judon and Christian Gonzalez that you're like, they should be ripping them apart, especially coming after a game where they struggled against the Giants. But to your point, there is something to be said about playing in the division. And, I would say that Bill Belichick, if it was against the Jets, is that would be more commonplace for like how much he's dominated them. I think the Bills have really shown in the last 5-6 years with Josh Allen that they're the more dominant team in that division when it comes to them versus the Patriots. But you're right. He had a great game plan in place. I think the Bills, you're seeing slowly but surely, but over the last few weeks, they've lost Matt Milano to the year. They lost Tre'Davious White. Von Miller still doesn't really look like Von Miller. I know on that last drive, he wasn't really on for a couple of those plays. And that's when they need him, especially when, passing downs. So this is a team that we'll be keeping our eye on because they have the talent. Stephon Diggs nearly made a huge play at the end of the game to get them in to what would have been manageable throwing touchdown or to throw for the game-winning touchdown instead of, having to do one of those like crazy plays at the end of the game. But yeah, it's a team that it seems like they're playing down to their opponents and, they go up against some of these tougher teams, but they've lost to the Jets in New York without Aaron Rodgers for the most part. Obviously, he only played 4 snaps. They've lost to the Patriots now. They showed up against the Dolphins, but then they struggled against the Giants. So they're definitely one of those teams where I can't really put my fingers on who they are right now. And it seems like the more you expect Josh Allen to do, the more you're getting disappointed by the fact that he's just not making those plays, or he's throwing. His first throw of the game was a horrible interception to double coverage. And I'm just like, that's not what you would expect from Josh Allen. That's not what you would know. Knowing Bill Belichick, you're trying to thread a needle. It's like that just wasn't the time or the place, and they were playing behind the whole game. Even when they got ahead, it felt like they were playing behind.
Yeah, and that game was capped off by a Mike Gesicki game-winning touchdown on none other than
the gritty guy.
The Gesicki gritty is its own, variation, but on none other than National Tight Ends Day. And when we're talking about National Tight Ends Day, the big tight ends came out and they balled. They really showed, like, I'm talking about the best tight ends in the game. Every one of them had impressive stat lines. And, it starts off with the guy at the top, the guy who I think is the best tight end of all time at this point, Travis Kelce, El Travador, putting up insane numbers against, we were talking about division games, guys who show up. Yeah, he shows up against the Chargers, or maybe he showed up for Taylor Swift. Maybe it was a combination of both. He went 12 for 179 and 1 touchdown. And I know we both have him in fantasy. And boy, he just like, even in the first half, to cap it off with that, touchdown where he was even saying he was a bit uncomfortable and found a way. But I know there was a couple of other tight ends that also had great numbers. Sam, do you want to talk about what we saw on National Tight Ends Day?
Yeah, I mean, if you would have just done a tight end bet on over receiving for all the tight ends, you probably would be, raking it in this weekend. But Darren Waller, who had struggled the last couple of weeks, he went for 7 receptions, 98 yards, and a touchdown. Mark Andrews caught 2 touchdowns. One and it was a diving touchdown into the end zone. That was a really nice one. We already talked about Kelsey. I mean, this guy seems to carve up the AFC West like nobody else's business. And you almost think, and I saw people talk about it after the fact, you would almost think that you'd rather be beaten by Marquez Valdes-Scantling 3-4 times down the field than just let Kelsey. He was sometimes just sitting in the middle of the field, like at the Chiefs' 50-yard line, like waiting to catch the ball. And obviously, yes, the Taylor Swift factor is definitely played a factor in the sense that he's had some great game. The T Swift factor is live and real. She's doing a little handshake with
don't lie.
He's having great games. Obviously, he wants to ball out for. I mean, that touchdown though, the impressive touchdown that he got, like a quick little screen, tight end screen at like the 2-1 yard line, and he got pushed by his offensive line. He talked about how scary it was, and that was literally just his core holding it in, just trying to get the ball over the line of scrimmage. But then we saw on Monday night, Hawkinson and George Kittle both had 78 plus yards. Dallas Goedert, who was slow for the first 5 weeks, is trying to awaken. And then you mentioned the Gesicki touchdown, the Gesicki gritty, to win it at the end of the game. There's something to be said about these really good tight ends, but on national tight end days, to see these guys actually ball out the way they did, and all the big guys to really have a big game, just shows you how important that position is in football, but also how it could be utilized. I mean, there's no Travis Kelce in the league. It's one, and then it's like 1A, 1B is still Travis Kelce, and then Mark Andrews, and then we can make a list on another podcast. But they all stepped up. They all stepped up, and I think each of those guys are so critical to their team's success. And you take those guys out, and they really leave such a huge hole in it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think it was just great to see. I think it's always enjoyable when you see tight ends go off, but on National Tight Ends Day of all weeks is just the icing on the cake. Now, you said something really interesting, and I think it's actually a perfect segue for this next topic about week 7 that I want to bring up, about how, these tight ends, just the role that they have, how pivotal it is. And I want to focus on the San Francisco 49ers for a second, who now back-to-back losses, both very close games in the grand scheme of things, but both were very winnable games. I mean, they weren't going up against Deshaun Watson in Cleveland, and they were going up against a Justin Jefferson-less Minnesota Vikings, as he's still hurt for another few weeks. And they lost both these games. And there's been a lot of ridicule for Brock Purdy. And the reason that I want to bring this to the forefront of this conversation is because I think we need to take a step back and understand that this is Brock Purdy's second year in the NFL. Obviously, he had this incredible rookie season where, this mystery relevant kind of comes in under Kyle Shanahan, is this perfect, quarterback, takes them to the NFC Championship, but gets hurt. There's all this hype around him, and he also has this great start to the second year of his campaign. But the fact that people are now like saying, oh, he's a system quarterback, or oh, like the hype isn't real, or he's not elite, like people need to chill. Like, this is a guy who in his second year as a quarterback, his winning percentage is incredible. Obviously, he's on an amazing team, but you can't discredit what he's doing. He's going to go through some rough patches, and he's going to figure that out. All of the greats did it. Peyton Manning was not great his first couple years. Andrew Luck, not great his first couple years. Tom Brady's a bit of an anomaly, so I can't really put, but I guess there has been that comparison of Brock Purdy coming in injured to Tom Brady, and both being drafted later in their respective drafts. But like, I think we need to not hate on Brock Purdy. Yes, these were games they should have won. And in the Cleveland game, he drove the field and put his team in the best position to win with a 41-yard field goal that was missed. And he threw some bad picks against Minnesota. But I just think, the way that the media really just clamped onto the idea of Brock Purdy not being elite was just a bit too harsh. And I want to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly have two thoughts, and I think one's positive, and everything you said about Brock Purdy is true. I mean, this guy, we talked about Christian McCaffrey over the last 16 games. They came in at the same time, McCaffrey and Purdy. right? They really did. And he just went on this absolute tear. And I think the story of Mr. Irrelevant being this amazing guy, nearly took San Fran to the Super Bowl, has Super Bowl aspirations. Yes, there's been a lot of hate on him. Should he have played better against Minnesota and Cleveland? Absolutely. You take out Deebo Samuel and Trent Williams on most teams, like their version of a Trent Williams and a Deebo Samuel, and those teams are going to struggle. But I will say, Brock Purdy definitely got outperformed by PJ Walker, and he got outperformed by Kirk Cousins in both games. So it wasn't like he was the better quarterback, and there was a couple of things that happened. He hadn't turned the ball over pretty much at all, and then he's turned the ball over a couple times against Minnesota, and he had a fumble and a turnover, an interception against Cleveland. So he has turned the ball over. But the thing that I came away from this Monday Nighter, and I could talk about Kirk Cousins on another topic about how impressed I was with him without Justin Jefferson and with guys like Addison and Brandon Powell and TJ Hawkinson stepping up. But for me, what I saw on Monday was the reason why Brock Purdy was chosen so late. It's a great story, and I think he's a great quarterback. But you saw some of the deficiencies that he has as a quarterback. When he loses a weapon, obviously, again, you take CeeDee Lamb out of Dallas, you take A.J. Brown out of Philly, you take these top guys out of their teams, the teams are going to struggle. Ayuk was still there. I think he had 50 yards in the first half and then really had nothing in the second half. I think Kittle started going in the second half after a slow first and a half. CMC was doing his thing. But I definitely saw a lot of plays where he wasn't reading the zone differently. Yes, he's still early. Like, he could still be a great quarterback. There were the memes of him I saw the Bradley Cooper hangover, like we screwed up, and saying to Dallas, like, we shouldn't have given up on Trey Lance. I don't think that they're going to go to Sam Darnold unless Brock Purdy is hurt. But when you looked at that last throw, it seemed like he was forcing something in there. You're right. He can't control Jake Moody missing a 41-yard field goal against Cleveland, but they'll point the direction at him. He didn't have a good day, so you can blame the missed kick at the end of the day by your rookie kicker, or the fact that if they played better throughout the day, they would have never been in that situation. The defense is doing their job. You never have to worry about that defense as long as Fred Warner and Bosa and Greenlaw. I forgot his name. Greenlaw. Thank you. Sorry, I just had to say it a few times in my head. Greenlaw. But they have so many great players on defense that they're always going to be in these one possession games. Can you make those plays in the crucial moments? And again, Purdy had a chance, and unlike in Cleveland where he marched his team down, he didn't march his team down, right? And he did struggle. He got his team to, I think, the 45. So he was moving the ball, but then in a key play, he forced something into a place where there seemed to be 3 Minnesota guys and not any San Francisco guys around. So that's what my takeaway was. Not that we should be harsh on Purdy and that a couple games will, put him in a situation where they have to think about the quarterbacks, but they're going up against Cincinnati coming off a bye, who looked very good defensively against Seattle at home right before their bye. Is Joe Burrow a little bit healthier? This is a team that could easily go into San Fran and give the 49ers their third consecutive loss. And again, both those games were on the road. Cleveland in the rain, a very tough place. We were there. We showed in the last podcast. We were at the Cleveland game on a beautiful day. It's a very tough place to play in, regardless of the dog pound. Minnesota Monday night primetime. Kirk showed up. He just balled out. So my takeaway: Purdy, not too worried. They still have so much talent around them that they're going to be fine. They'll still end up winning the NFC West. But I saw things that were creeping in that made me think this is why he went 109. There's so many teams passed on him, and it's because he still has to learn and figure out the game, but really understand that you don't have a big arm. He's not throwing deep balls like Patrick Mahomes and Herbert can do. He doesn't have the ability to run out of the pocket like a Josh Allen can, or Lamar Jackson. So his strengths somewhat are within the system, but it's a matter of having everyone available and making sure you just know first target, second target, third target, and making those throws on time. And he'll be fine. It's just the last few weeks have shown me a little bit more that he is not bulletproof and that he can be affected, and you get pressure on his face like any quarterback, and he's going to make bad mistakes.
Yeah, I think those are all valid points, and I definitely agree with a lot that you have to say. I think I was just more trying to emphasize that like the critics can be harsh, and
Oh, absolutely.
you gotta drown out that noise. And I'm sure Kyle Shanahan still has a lot of faith in Brock Purdy, but yeah, we gotta just remember that he's still a second year quarterback. He's going to go through these mistakes and these adjustments, and he'll be better for it. But speaking of bulletproof, there are two quarterbacks that do look bulletproof right now in Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts. And both the Chiefs and the Eagles decisively win their games against tough opponents, both winning 31-17 in both games. These were matchups that we talked about last week being, marquee matchups of week 7. And, I think it just goes to show that the Eagles and the Chiefs are above. They're at a level that's just, some teams just can't get to right now. And also you got to shout out their defense as much as their offense coming in, especially the Eagles going up against the firepower that is the Miami Dolphins, the greatest show on turf. Yeah. But yeah, these were impressive wins by well-rounded teams. And I hate to say it, but I think right now it looks like it's very possible for a repeat Super Bowl. I know it's early, but these two teams are very, very dominant in all facets of the game.
I agree. And before I give you my 2 cents, I'm just curious what you thought of the Eagles Kelly green jerseys. As someone who's a Cowboys fan, I just like. I love them. I like they were getting a little bit of hate online. I think for the most part they were very nice, and it's just from prime time. Like I do like those jerseys. The black ones are okay, whatever, but I think those were really nice. And I just like new jerseys. I like to see what teams do, and I think that bringing back the throwback, everyone likes a good throwback. The Randall Cunningham jersey and stuff like that. We've seen in a couple of instances on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia with those types of jackets and jerseys. I just like those jerseys. It was a really cool, probably my favorite game this year, matchup-wise, like jersey matchup. Like
even the Dolphins.
Yeah. And blue and then the green.
Yeah, I thought that too.
I never think like that, but I wanted to make that point.
You know what? You think about it when you make Madden jersey choices. You're like, oh, these would be nice decisions. Prime time. We do that a lot.
We do that a lot. We spend 5 minutes going, I like this alternate. No, you know what? I'm going to go dark this time. You go light the next time. I go, okay, well, if I'm doing the light, I'm doing the throwback Houston Oilers ones. That they had. I think the Titans have this one this week that looks pretty cool. It's the old Oilers one. I saw
the Colts have a new jersey this year that's
right, and that had a lot of negative reviews online. I actually thought it was okay. I remember texting
hate, man.
Yeah, well, we're all positive here. Zach Moss, I'm like, he has a scene. Like, no, everyone gets to see. I'm like, what is this? Like, house league? We're all captains here. It's like, no, the captain's on this patch, and this is just C for Colts. I was like, okay, fine, whatever. Going back to what you asked, Eagles.
Yeah,
I will say the more impressive game for me was without a doubt Patrick Mahomes. I mean, Mahomes was on fire. Just to throw a couple stats at you, just insane. 32 for 42, 424 yards and 4 touchdowns. I mean, this is what you think of when you think of Mahomes, and you look at some of his other games this year. The most yards he had up to this point was a week prior. He had 306. We're so used to those 350s and 330s and something like that. When someone hits 400, it's definitely something that you have to just like, wow, like he was on fire. And again, Travis Kelce and him were 10 for 10 on targets to receptions and like for 130 plus yards in the first half. So it really set the tone, but they got Marquez Valdes-Scantling involved. They got Sky Moore involved. Rasheed Rice looked like he was a really nice, he's coming along really well. And then you throw it off to like the McKinnon or Pacheco. The first drive of the game, they threw a 40-yard pass to McKinnon who ran for a touchdown that was called back. That would have been another touchdown, another 50, 40 yards. He could have been at 500 yards is what I'm saying. I felt like it was more impressive for what the Chiefs did, and both teams were at home, right? The Chiefs at home against the Chargers, the Eagles at home against the Dolphins. But Jalen Hurts, and again, I know because I have him in fantasy, he's got 6 rushing touchdowns, and it seems like every 4th and 1, whether it's from their own 25, 26, like they did against the Dolphins, or they're at the goal line, they're going to get that. It seems like a play that just is, Nick Sirianni said
automatic.
Yeah, Nick Sirianni said something, and I thought it was like, I got to bring this up on the podcast. He goes, you go into every drive knowing it's 1st and 9. It's just a weird thought to have.
What a crazy mindset.
It's just a crazy mindset. He also went nuts when they found out they got Kevin Byard, which I know we'll get to trades in a little bit, but Jalen Hurts has 9 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. Like, he hasn't been dominant. He's been good, but the Eagles offense has struggled for the most part. I mean, they had a couple good games. They had one against Washington. I believe they put up 38 points. They looked okay against the Rams. They struggled against the Jets, 23 against the Rams, 34 against the Vikings. They struggled against the Eagles. Like, they're putting up 20-plus points, which will always, keep you in the game. And with A.J. Brown on this tear that he's had, 6 games with 125-plus yards, this guy is just, you throw the ball downfield. Like, we don't know why the Titans gave him up for nothing, but again, we'll get into those trades in a second. I just felt Hurts, he did pass for 279 yards. He did throw 2 touchdowns and ran 1 as well. He's trying to also do what Lamar's doing and stay more inside the pocket and utilize his receivers and Dallas Goedert and Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. They also have a slew of running backs that they like to pass to Gainwell and Boston Scott and DeAndre Swift. But there's still something off in the Eagles offense. I think that they are adding players. They are going to get a little bit healthier as the season goes on in terms of some of the injuries that they have on their side. But Patrick Mahomes, what he did, I mean, again, this is why he's the league MVP. And these are games that remind you that he is the best in the game to do it, because he's running for first downs. He's making plays. He's scrambling. He's got that unspeakable chemistry with Kelsey. And to me, we're definitely heading towards another Eagles-Chiefs Super Bowl, but I would put more of a stock into the Chiefs, even though the AFC is a lot harder to get out of than the NFC, than I would in the Eagles, because I do think there are some issues with the Eagles that we can address on later podcasts. But it'll be interesting when they face Dallas. They do have a matchup against Kansas City coming up too in a couple of weeks as well, so that will also be interesting.
That'll be fun to talk about when we get to that point. And I think, obviously when you talk about the Eagles and the Chiefs, the main conversations are the quarterbacks. As it rightfully so, it's the NFL. We love talking about quarterbacks, but both these teams have stout defenses. And, the Chiefs, shutting out the Chargers in the second half is impressive that they were able to do that. Maybe it was, being deflated by that Travis Kelce touchdown at the end of the first half. But either way, like, McDuffie's been playing incredible on that defense. Nick Bolton, Willie Gay, Chris Jones is elite. Like,
Bolton's out for a few months now, right?
Well, now he is, but I'm just saying, like, in that game.
That'll be interesting. I mean, again, week 1, they should have paid Chris Jones. I mean, Chris Jones sets everything. And then the secondary under Spagnuolo is able to really, and you got Bolton. He's a Fred Warner type. He's not Fred Warner, and I won't give him that credit just yet, but Nick Bolton seems to be everywhere and anywhere. How the loss of him impacts them over the next 2 months will be very interesting to see how this defense can hold up.
Yeah, and that's definitely something we'll monitor. But my point that I was just trying to make is, obviously these are firepower offenses, but these defenses are very good, and they've, meticulously got players to make that defense strong. And I think even what we saw in that Eagles-Dolphins game, holding Tyreek Hill to 11 catches for 86 yards, which I know you're thinking, that's still a pretty good day for a receiver. But if you're holding for Tyreek Hill for, 8 yards a catch, that's impressive, right? Like, they clearly had a game plan to not let him get behind them. Obviously, I know there was a few plays that got called back and it dropped one, but that's my point that I'm trying to make is, these defenses are stout. And the Eagles, you talked about it, Nick Sirianni, pretty fired up, just got a little bit better bringing in Kevin Byard. And I got to tell you, before we jump into this, being an Indianapolis Colts fan my whole life, playing the Tennessee Titans twice a year, I've seen how good Kevin Byard is. This is a great addition to that Eagles secondary.
Where
it really is. Like, he's a baller.
Sorry, no, he is a baller. I didn't mean to cut you off there. I was just gonna say, and Jerry Jones said that he doesn't want to initiate any trades. It's like, I just don't get it. And again, I won't go down to my own thoughts on the Cowboys just yet. But yeah, it seems like the best teams are getting better. The Niners had McCaffrey last year. He takes them nearly to the Super Bowl, but you can see the impact that he's made, and they gave up, like a 4th, a 5th, a 6th, and a 7th. I don't know what they got for Kevin Byard. They traded Terrell Edmonds, who I just saw a great video of him at the Phillies game. I guess he won't be going to many Phillies games anymore because the Phillies are also out. But Kevin Byard,
not sunny in Philadelphia right now.
No, but the Eagles did get a good guy in Kevin Byard, and I think teams who believe they're on the cusp should be making moves. There was actually a move that happened this morning. Frank Clark signs with the Seattle Seahawks for the remainder of the year. The Denver Broncos parted with him. The former Chiefs, he had apparently a lot of suitors that were looking for his talent, but he goes back to where he started his career in Seattle again. A team that if San Fran has a couple, injuries, they could be the team that knocks off San Fran and gets a home playoff game. They seem to be going at their own pace, and no one's really talking about them. And they won without DK Metcalf. Sure, it's against the Cardinals, but the Cardinals have given fits to people this year. So this is the NFL that we are in now, which is it's a win now mentality. It's never about what can you do for us later. It's what can you do for us now. The Eagles were aggressive before last year's in the draft. They trade for A.J. Brown, and A.J. Brown has been on this absolute tear. You said something about Tyreek Hill and the defenses. I just wanted to make a point about that. When you hold a guy to 88, 89 yards, you said Tyreek Hill?
86.
He was averaging 130 going into this game. So if you can hold this guy to what his under is, his under, I think, on the game was 98.5. So you held him to his under on his player prop total, but I'm just saying his total on the league average, because he's not always going to get 125, 130 yards. But the fact that they did that, it seemed like a lot of those catches were like one catch for 4 yards, like a screen, and then they just made a great tackle. And I can imagine it's super hard to catch him and let alone tackle him. And the couple times he got loose, the one touchdown he did with one of the best celebrations I've seen all year when he did the fish and he got reeled in. I was hands down. Even the Vikings had a great one where off the fumble they did the limbo and they raised one of their players up and they all want to reap it. I digress. Point is, we're talking about the defenses. I get very caught into like my whole thing. I'm like, do you remember this? Remember that?
Of course.
The defense,
we're talking about trade.
We're talking about the defenses for the Eagles and the Chiefs being stout. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a move made by the Chiefs to help with that Nick Bolton injury and supplement them. And even when Nick Bolton does come back, having someone that they can play off. I think Buffalo needs to add a move. We can talk about all the teams that need to make a move, but the Eagles, again, once they've shown, hey, we were in the Super Bowl, we were, a play or two away from winning the Super Bowl. Let's add something. Clearly, our biggest weakness is our secondary. Sure, they have Darius Slay, and he does his job, but outside of that, they lost C.J. Gardner-Johnson to Detroit. They have lost a couple other guys due to injuries. They needed some help, and when they see Tyreek Hill going over the top, and you can see a guy like Deebo Samuel or Ayuk or CeeDee Lamb or Justin Jefferson, guys that they may have to face in the playoffs, you're going to, Mike Evans, whoever comes out of the NFC South, you're going to need that secondary help. And again, like you said, you're a Colts fan. You've seen Kevin Byard play. One thing I've never questioned is that Titans defense over the last few years with Mike Vrabel. And I think that the Eagles got themselves a really good one. I just wish more teams who are in that win now mentality, Cowboys, a couple other teams, Bills, a couple other teams that are like, we can make a jump, we can make a push, let's do something. Who cares about draft assets? Because right now, if the team is healthy, we have a chance. And if the Eagles stay healthy and they add a guy like Byard, and we'll see what happens before the October 31st trade deadline, they might add some more. This is only putting them in a better situation to go back to the Super Bowl, and in the Eagles' case, potentially even win it.
Yeah, and trade deadline is next week. So this idea of a buyer's mentality and being aggressive, it'd be very interesting. And I think as a fan of the NFL, I would love to see more teams adopt, the aggressive mentality that the Philadelphia Eagles have shown time and time again. We think back these past few years, who have they made trades for? Also not always at the deadline, but, they've traded for veteran players like A.J. Brown, Darius Slay, now Kevin Byard, and DeAndre Swift. And they've all, assuming that Kevin Byard, fits in seamlessly with their scheme and everything, they've all played great for that team, and they've elevated the level of play. A.J. Brown has more receiving yards right now than all of Tennessee Titans receivers combined, right? Yeah. So the point is, the Eagles are showing a blueprint. Now, yes, they're giving up a lot of draft capital, and I'm sure there's a whole conversation we can have on the valuation of draft picks and how, I think sometimes it's very easy when you're playing in Madden, but it seems like you can get rid of your later round picks to get these veteran players that can, come into your team and elevate your play and help you make a push. And, I think the Eagles are really onto something. I think them getting Kevin Byard is a really good addition. But, ESPN released a list of potential trade targets. So I'm going to list out some of these names, and maybe we can talk to where we think these guys are best fit. That's what I thought would be a little fun thing. So let's start off with the guy who got the game-winning touchdown for the New England Patriots, Mike Gesicki. Tight end. If you look at some of the teams, Dawson Knox just got hurt, so maybe the Bills want to poach him.
The question is, you're going to throw out a name, and where do I think he's best fit?
Correct.
Okay. Just looking at some of the names that we were talking about off air, and Gesicki and Renfro, who's been a shell of himself this year, Derrick Henry, they're really, I think any team would take depth at this point. There's always going to be injuries. There's always going to be, the Bills have Dalton Kincaid, but if Dawson Knox is out long term, sure, they could use a Gesicki. I'm not really sure who is best to pick up these guys. I know I think to me the almost the better question, and I'll get back to the Gesicki one in a second, but almost the better question is, who are the sellers? What team are the sellers? You talked about AJ Brown, Kevin Byard, Darius Slay, and DeAndre Swift. The common denominator, those were two teams that were in rebuilds. The Titans now in rebuild, and that they gave up AJ Brown last year kind of was the sign of them trying to rebuild. I think this week with Tannehill potentially being out, there was rumors that Malik Willis and Will Levis will both get times at quarterback, which I don't really get. Just try one of them, and if he's playing well, stick with them. And then the Lions, when they gave up Swift this year, they obviously went with Jahmyr Gibbs, but when they gave up Slay, they were also trying to look elsewhere and really start rebuilding that team. So, yeah, to answer your question on where Gesicki's going to go, I think any team will just use depth. I think that we can nitpick who would be the best fit, but I think really putting more of a focus on who are those sellers right now and what they can sell off. I think, top, and we just talked about them, is the Titans. Where's Derrick Henry going to go? Because he's an expiring contract, and, you can give him the opportunity for everything that he's done for the team over the last decade or so, that you can put him in a position where he's going to be able to compete for Super Bowl and play in the playoffs, because the Titans clearly aren't. And I think, some people link him to the Dallas Cowboys. Sure, it'd be nice with Tony Pollard. I think Tony Pollard does a good job, but I just think it adds another dimension where you throw in Derrick Henry, and it's tougher for these linebackers to tackle a guy like Derrick Henry. Now you got to put more of a focus on having Derrick Henry and Tony Pollard. But I think anyone could use a Derrick Henry. Sure, the Eagles would want him, even though Isaiah Pacheco has been playing great.
Okay, I guess I totally get your point.
Your question. I just thought that was a better way of anticipating it. The Raiders, they're clearly, right? Devontae Adams going to go. Is Hunter Renfrow going to go? There's no point in holding on to those assets at this point because they're not doing anything for them.
I think teams you look at the bottoms of each of the divisions, the Patriots seem like a team that would be better off to sell their assets. The Broncos, we talked about them last week, as a team to sell their assets. The Chargers, I'm not sure how you even blow up that team, if they even feel like they can. So I'm not even going to touch that. But the Raiders, definitely are a team that could sell some assets. The Titans we talked about a lot, obviously. The Commanders and the Giants have both been teams that people have looked at as potential sellers.
We heard Montez Sweat, but we also heard the Giants say that they don't want to give up Saquon Barkley. And you're just like, they didn't want to pay you. They decided to pay Daniel Jones, and you're saying you don't want out of New York. You have a chance to be on Buffalo, where you'd be insane with Josh Allen. And it's just no, I'm okay in New York. Okay, fine. Yeah. Not that the Giants were going to trade him anyways, but yeah, these are teams who are clearly trying to figure themselves out. Arizona, I don't think, is rebuilding or trading off their assets. I think they already did that before the season with DeAndre Hopkins and
Isaiah Simmons.
Isaiah Simmons, thank you. So yeah, so there's that's the real question for me, and who's going to be. We know who the buyers are. We know that Kansas City. We know that Buffalo should. Miami might. Right, but they added Jalen Ramsey. We know Dallas should. Maybe Tampa Bay gets involved, right? So that to me is really interesting.
So I'm going to reframe my question here. I'm going to provide you with the list. I'm going to provide you with the list of potential trade targets that ESPN had, and I'm going to ask you who you think is most likely to get traded.
Okay.
All right. So I already mentioned
Consternation hat.
Yeah, I already mentioned Mike Gesicki. They also mentioned Hunter Renfrow, who was a guy you talked about. Derrick Henry,
Mm-hmm.
Jerry Jeudy. They did mention Saquon Barkley on it, so we'll put him on the list, but I feel like I already know where you're swaying towards. Mike Evans and Daniel Hunter as potential trade targets. So of those players, who do you think is most likely to get dealt at the deadline next week?
Wow. I honestly think to answer your question, I would just go Hunter Renfrow. I just don't think he's doing anything in Las Vegas. It makes zero sense for them to keep him, and he could be an impact player. I think the question out of all those players, and I don't know if Mike Evans is going to go. I think him and Baker
I don't think
going
so.
too, and I think Tampa Bay in the NFC South, they're
competitive.
They're 50% chance to pretty much win the division. I mean, Atlanta beat them, but like barely. I mean, we talked about division games earlier. I wanted to just make the point that it just seems like every division game this week that was happening was just a tight one. Washington Giants came down to the end. Atlanta Tampa Bay came down to the end. So there's, it's always going to be tough within the division. So I don't think Mike Evans will go. I think Derrick Henry would be the biggest impact player to go. I think he would have something, especially he would join a team that already has a running back in place, right? I think Ezekiel Elliott probably should go. I'm not saying he should come back to Dallas, but I'm saying like, what's the point of the Patriots keeping him at this point? Like,
I don't think anyone wants him.
But some people might want him. It's just a depth goal line pushing that thing. Like Zeke still got a touchdown last week where he did the Zeke thing that he did last year, which was like push his way from the 2-yard line. Like he's pretty good in that sense. I'm not sure where he would fit, but like, Seattle, outside of Kenneth Walker, like Zach Charbonnet hasn't really been doing anything. He's been hurt. They could use a guy like Zeke Elliott just to like push the ball from 3rd and 1 to first down and move the chains. So I think he's another name I would look out for. I think Hunter Renfrow, though, is the most likeliest to move, but I think that a guy like Derrick Henry would be the most impactful player wherever he goes.
I mean, we talked a lot about the Bills at the start of this episode too, and losing Damian Harris. They lost their goal line guy, and I don't think Latavius Murray. Well, a lot of options. Look, it'll be interesting to see. It'll be fun to talk about trade deadline next week if moves start to actually occur. But some interesting
point. One more point, because we're talking about the Bills. I actually think Hunter Renfrow does go to the Bills. I'll tell you why. I feel like they're really missing that Cole Beasley type player, which is exactly what Hunter Renfrow is. And I'm not saying Cole Beasley is better than Hunter Renfrow. I'm not going to make that argument here. I think they're both pretty much have done the same thing, which is that slot option. I think Hunter Renfrow runs better routes than Cole Beasley. I'll say that definitively. But when I looked at that game against New England, I said, okay, they've got Diggs on the outside. He's usually getting all the coverage. Gabe Davis had been having a good year, but he'd been doing what Gabe Davis does in the last few years, which is he'll throw a dud out there for like 1 reception, 6 yards, right? And you need that other option. James Cook, they were getting in more involved. You mentioned that earlier. But I think a guy like Hunter Renfrow, I mean, they have this guy Shakir, who's like their third down receiver. I mean, maybe when we do the next week podcast and the trade deadlines happen, we're like, oh, see, I was right. I should have put money on where Hunter Renfrow's next team is. I think he's the most likeliest to move, and I'm going to put it out there that I think he's going to go with the Bills. I think the Bills should just do it. And if you're listening, Sean McDermott and the Buffalo Bills organization to our podcast, which of course you are, go out and make that move, because I think that's just going to be a guy who's going to move the chains. It's going to really help Josh Allen open it up a little bit more as well.
And you killed 2 birds with 1 stone by answering that question. You told me who you thought was most likely to get traded and his best fit. So we appreciate you finding a way to.
What I'm here for.
Look, we're throwing you some curveballs here, and you're just you're hitting dingers. So we appreciate that, but I wanna move ahead. Trade deadline. We'll see what happens, and we'll talk about it next week. If and when moves do
who should have made moves? What moves weren't made? What moves were made?
There'll be a lot to talk about for sure, but I want to change focus and bring up what was, I think, the most exciting news that I heard in the NFL this week, because I was not sure who it was going to be or if they were even going to do it, and that is the HBO Hard Knocks in-season team announcement being none other than the greatest show on surf. We talked about them in our first episode last week. We talked about them again this week and how exciting they are.
Every week going forward.
And the reality is they've been so exciting. And the fact that there's all this behind the scenes footage that we don't know that they've already been getting, and it's Hard Knocks. So it's going to be top level storytelling, top level content. But you think about I want to see Tyreek Hill behind the scenes. I want to see the behind the scenes of the 70 burger, just what the vibes were of that team, of just the swagger that they have from Mike McDaniel and all the other players to just the dominant start that they've been having. This is a really fun team to follow for a full season, and I'm really looking forward to it, Sam. I'm sure I could say the same for you.
Well, they're hoping they're not like the Arizona Cardinals, who were the in-season team last year, and they lost Kyler Murray to a season-ending injury. So, I think that it's really fun. Obviously, as football fans, we're always, me and you were watching Hard Knocks. The fact that they're doing a second AFC East team, I was shocked. But the Dolphins, I don't know if they are allowed it or if it's something that they could have said no to, but it's very exciting. I think that there's going to be a couple headlines. First of all, I just want to see these players come in on shorts and in November and December, they're in Miami, right? They can just live it, going to the Caribbean nights and all the fun stuff that you can do in Miami, and just being able to play games in November, December. Dallas plays in Miami later in the year. I'm curious to see how that is shown. But the couple big headlines I will say, or the couple big storylines I'm looking forward to, is one, probably the return of Jalen Ramsey. This is a guy who has been out. He's coming back. He was talking some real crap to some Eagles fans, even though they were losing on Sunday night.
The Shedeur Sanders. Look at the watch.
Yeah, I saw the Shedeur Sanders. Is that what we're calling it now? The Shedeur look at the watch?
That's what someone called it, so I'm just piggybacking.
So that would be number one. Number two would be Tyreek Hill's chase to 2,000. There's obviously an honest conversation of if he hits 2,000, does he deserve to win MVP? I think he'll definitely win Offensive Player of the Year, but he is at 900 plus yards through 7 weeks. There's no doubt in my mind that he should hit 2,000 at this rate. If everyone stays healthy, and everyone meaning Tua and him, that's all that they really need, then they should be fine, because they'll find ways to get him the ball, and then he'll run 80 yards down the field. So that to me is really exciting, because we've never seen that in the NFL, ever. It's not just in our lifetime, ever. We came close with Calvin Johnson, 1936, but we didn't see 2,000. If it hits 2,000, I've done it a couple of times in Madden, but again, that's the third time we brought up Madden, everything in threes. But I think Tyreek Hill is definitely the huge storyline. And then my last storyline is just Mike McDaniels. I've just seen so many videos and articles about who this guy is, seeing him on the sideline, see how he interacts. We sent a video to each other this past week about that video against the Giants game, where he's just I think I just want to throw the ball on this drive. And it was 12 passes, 0 runs. And it's just okay, I can do whatever the hell I want. And we talked about earlier with Peyton Manning doing that motion and all the different kind of calibrations that are needed by the quarterback in that San Francisco system. Well, who helped build that system? Mike McDaniel, before he came to Miami, was with San Francisco, right? And so he really learned from Kyle Shanahan, learned inside that system. And I've seen plays where they're bringing Tyreek Hill into the tight end tackle position. We talked about it last week, and then they bring him back out, or Jalen Waddle comes out. Tyreek Hill said this past week that there's a guy on the practice squad, a white dude too, who's the second fastest guy on the team. He says he's faster than Devon Achane. Another guy who they clearly missed on Sunday. Everyone was talking about Jeff Wilson Jr. I'm Jeff Wilson Jr. is not even part of that offense anymore. I don't even think he was involved, but it was Raheem Mostert, and then it wasn't him. It was Salvin Ahmed, I believe his name is. And then after that, it would be Jeff Wilson. But this guy, Devon Achane, is that guy who probably actually took the leap over Raheem Mostert. So seeing him come back, right, and all that speed on that team, I just want to be inside the head of Mike McDaniels and saying, okay, we've got all this speed on the team. No one can really cover us in man-to-man coverage. They have to play deep. And if they're playing deep, then let's just take everything that's on the crossing routes, right? So I want to see really him break down, and I love his story of where he was growing up. I could spend another 30, 40 minutes talking about some of his stories, but I know we'll see all of it in Hard Knocks. But those are my 3 biggest storylines that I'm looking forward to with the upcoming Hard Knocks Dolphins season.
I agree with all of those as being key highlight storylines, but I think you're forgetting one more. And I think for whatever reason, I guess when you have all of this firepower with the Miami Dolphins, you can lose sight on the guy who's at the helm of it. Tua Tagovailoa. I'm very curious to see the type of leader that Tua is. Also, the mentality that he goes into each week after what was arguably one of the scariest injuries I've ever watched personally live in the NFL. I guess I shouldn't say that. There was a pretty bad one in the Bills-Bengals game that we don't have to get into, but what Tua went through, and being able to come back from that, the resilience, the adversity.
Got another concussion against the Packers on Christmas Day. He got like two in his comeback. There was the one against the Bills that he didn't really play, and then he was the Bengals, and then he got another one, and he was out for the rest of the year.
Right. So I'm just saying, that mentality, that conversation. We also know what, when you watch the quarterback and what NFL Films does there, like the way they can dissect it and really peel back the curtain and show you the very human characteristics of these quarterbacks. I'm just very curious to see how Tua leads this team, how he goes about his day. I think he's, for whatever reason, he's not a marketable quarterback in the eyes of many, but I think he's a top 10 quarterback. I think he definitely makes the case when he's healthy and he plays consistently. Again, he's got a lot of weapons, but I'm really curious to see just that dynamic, and his relationship with Mike McDaniel will be very interesting to see. But, all this is to say that the HBO Hard Knocks in season with the greatest show on turf is going to be fun to watch.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned the 70 burger. If they have that one, I'd love to see the reaction. But also this past Sunday, I mean, it was former Alabama teammates and Jalen Hurts going up against Tua. That I know was an important game for Jalen because he got benched in that national championship game, and Tua came in and won it. And ever since then, his whole trajectory was changed, and he went to Oklahoma, and then Alabama started Tua, and then where they are full circle now. So I agree. It's going to be really exciting. And then, just to wrap off this podcast, because, again, we could chat for hours about this, but let's just do a quick look ahead into Week 8. What stands out for you, Seth?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up because, there isn't – I'm going to be honest. The matchups aren't as exciting as last week, especially, the primetime game that we have on Sunday night between the Chargers and Chicago Bears team with Justin Fields injured. Chicago Bears, yeah, without Justin Fields.
The
Bears. So there's less, marquee matchups, but some of the storylines that I'm looking forward to, the one that I'm probably the most excited for is the battle between the first and second overall pick, chapter 2 of the CJ Stroud, Bryce Young era and saga, and the first chapter being the fact that Bryce Young edged CJ Stroud with that first overall pick. Right. I think it will be a very interesting matchup. Obviously, these are not two teams that are having the greatest seasons. They're not playoff teams per se, especially the Carolina Panthers, but there's a lot of pride in getting picked first overall. And there's a lot of, edge and a lot of things that you want to prove to the team that didn't take you when you're CJ Stroud. And I think that matchup, Bryce Young versus CJ Stroud at 1:00, will be very interesting. Also, two new head coaches going up against each other, and Frank Reich and DeMeco Ryans. So maybe not a marquee matchup, but for two starting quarterbacks that should be in this league for the next decade, to have their first matchup against each other, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. I think it's going to be exciting. If we learn anything from Week 7, we picked 3 games. I think the most craziest game was the Cleveland-Indy game. You just never know what's going to happen. A couple of storylines that I think that are interesting. The 2 big games, though, I will say, I think without a doubt, are the Bengals at Niners and then the Rams at Cowboys. But a couple storylines that I want to touch about. I always find it interesting because you saw it in preseason that these two teams do not like each other. They play in the same stadium. The Jets versus the Giants. I mean, the Jets coming off the battle at MetLife, the battle at Gotham City. I mean, people are feeling a little bit better about the Jets. They're coming off a big win against the Eagles. They got the bye week. Breece Hall looks great. Zach Wilson starting to look a little bit better. Maybe the whispers of Aaron Rodgers coming at Christmas are still possible. He says it every week on Pat McAfee. Love to see that. Is Tyrod Taylor going to start again? He's looking pretty good. He's 1-1. Could have been 2-0. Is Daniel Jones going to get back on the field, or do they just keep riding Tyrod Taylor? I do think Arthur Smith in Atlanta going back to Tennessee, where he was work once the offensive coordinator there, seeing how that works. Not a game I'm really interested to, but a storyline that I'm going to follow. And then another one, again, not that it's going to be a really under the radar game, but Jacksonville at Pittsburgh. Jacksonville obviously having the longer week. Trevor Lawrence was a little banged up too going into that Saints game. They come away with the win. They're starting to take that little edge in the AFC South and maybe take their step and maybe get closer to, a number 2 seed, maybe even passing Kansas City at one point. I'm not sure if they can do that. But Pittsburgh, I mean, whatever you want to say about the Matt Canada and that offense, and it still hasn't been pretty, but it seems like in the fourth quarter, Kenny Pickett turns things around. George Pickens, we talked about him being a real nice player this year, fantasy-wise, but also really taking that step up. He was huge last week. Just a quick stat on him. Last week, he had 5 for 107. It was his second game in a row with 100-plus yards, 130 against Baltimore. And we just saw Baltimore shut out a really good Detroit defense. So George Pickens, we know, is real. Najee Harris got into the end zone. And that's a really interesting game. It's 4-2 versus 5-2. Could have implications down the road if they both were to win the division. This would be the ultimate deciding factor of who would get the higher seed. So a game that I'm really interested in is the Jacksonville and Pittsburgh game. Didn't think I would say that a few weeks ago, but one team's 5-2 and one team's 4-2, and they're both, one's leading the division, one's right there with the Ravens.
Yeah, and you know what? Something to be said about Mike Tomlin just refusing to lose.
Never has a losing season.
Yeah, and that trend seems like it could continue this year. The way that defense is playing, the way that team's playing, the way that they've also been able to battle through some key injuries with that team. Casey Hayward went out, Deontay Johnson went out. They're both starting to come back. Freiermuth went out, and they're still
playing with like a banged up hand.
And they're still 4-2. And, the other game that you mentioned that where this game actually has a lot of impact is that Bengals 49ers game, because Bengals lose this game off a bye week against the 49ers, which are a very good team, as we've talked about. They slipped to 3-4 in a division that is very competitive and pulling away from them. So the Bengals, it's not a must win matchup, but you got to start thinking, especially off the bye week, this is a big battle for the Bengals, the Triple B.
Yeah, and this is a Niners team. We've just talked about it earlier in the show about they're going to be coming in. You don't think they're going to be pissed off? Like, I imagine Debo's playing. I imagine Trent Williams will probably play as well. I mean, I'll have to look at the injury report, but both were questionable and then chose not to play, gave him an extra week. If Joe Burrow plays Joe Burrow-esque, I think he can beat any team, any defense. I really do. I think Jamar Chase, T. Higgins a little bit healthier. They really got to establish the run game. They are 31st, I believe, in run offense with Joe Mixon, who, we were in Cleveland. We were asking people who we thought the best running backs were in the AFC North. And I don't know, Joe Mixon, where are they ranked offense? 31st, right? And this is a rush defense that's ranked 3rd in San Fran. But Joe Burrow makes some plays. You're right. It almost feels like a must-win. Browns are 4-2, win 2 straight wins from P.J. Walker. The Ravens show that they may be the only team right now that can compete with the Chiefs as that top dogs in the AFC. And yeah, the Steelers are still finding ways to win. Crazy.
Well, all these storylines will come to a head. Week 8. That concludes episode 2. We're back at it next week, where we'll dive into all of this and hopefully an exciting trade deadline. But yeah, should be a fun week. I know your Cowboys go up against the Rams. That will be a pretty fun game. Could be a lot of firepower in that game. Also might not be, because you never know what Cowboys are going to show up. But I had to take that little jab at the end.
I've had jabs against you and your Colts the last 2 weeks, so it's fair enough. We'll see.
Yeah. And I guess you took a pass on me this week because of that poor officiating, which hopefully we won't see this week. But, that sums it up. Week 8 should be an interesting one.
Can't wait to talk about it next week.